Learning about Ohel, Asiyas Ohel, and the fundamentals are Ohel Kva is an Issa Diuraisa, and an Ohel is no different than a binyan. And if it's an Ohel Kva, it would be an Issa Diuraisa, which is a Boina. Ohel Are is an Issa Dirabona, and I think in one of the previous Shiurim we discussed binyan Lesho. And Bekesha to the Parasol, Machloikes noite biudu some soifer binyan lesho have a binyan olo. I'm not going to speak about binyan lesho. I think the very last siman in Minchas Oshan Shemois, siman Kuv Daled, deals with the question of binyan lesho. V'yeshli hirhurei devorim. I wrote there what I think. Lo kedivrei anoide biudu v'achsam soifer. I have a different approach regarding the big question is, what's the shittas abavli? And what we find, Yerushalmi Shabbos Nun Beis Omid Beis, a Machloikes Amerom, or the binyan lesho have a binyan or no. But what I mean to say is binyan lachud v'oyel lachud. As long as we're dealing with an Ohel Kva, Ohel and binyan are the same. Ohel Kva is an isiduraisa just like binyan. However, regarding the Ohel, less man the palig. Ohel Are is only in Esderabonon. Does Ohel Are have to do with binyan lesho? For some reason, I think in the some soif in the Nagadu there's confusion between Ohel and binyan. The Yerushalmi deals with binyan lesho; it doesn't deal with Ohel. Regarding Ohel, sugim mefureshes Ohel Are is only a derabanan. So when they deal with an umbrella is definitely not a binyan. The maximum you could make of an umbrella, if you have a strong imagination, make it into a Ohel. My father was a great Talmud Chochem, and some of you know my father. Rebbe Kiva Reb Chaim knew my father, and they remember him when he used to come to my shiurim. And he had a sense of humor. And one of the stories he used to tell, some little town in Hungary, they asked the mayor of the town whether they could make an Eruv. And he said, "What is an Eruv? Could you explain to me?" And they told him, we have 2 posts and a wire on top, and that is considered as if there's a wall, and that is the concept of Eruv. So the Goyish mayor mystically asked, if you Jews have such a powerful imagination and you could imagine a wire being a wall, why don't you just imagine you have a wire as well? He said, if you have such a powerful imagination. So that's a good question. Halacha is halacha. We imagine what we were told to imagine. Now we don't imagine what we were not told to imagine. That is the nature of halacha. But it is clear that an umbrella is not a building, it's not a binyan. The maximum you could make of an umbrella is an Ohel. And how would it be an Ohel Kva? Is there any bigger Ohel other than an umbrella? So it's just beyond me. The Noid Yehuda says, he bases on the Rif. Yesh begagoy tefach is an Ohel Kva. Pshat the Rif is, im ein begagoy tefach, it can never be an Ohel Kva. If yesh begagoy tefach, it might be an Ohel Kva, but it doesn't mean that every Ohel sheyesh begagoy tefach is an Ohel Kva. And the concept of Arei and Kva is based on specific criteria. How long will this stand? And no Ohel is more Arei than an umbrella. So, what I just mean to say Aleph Beis, the Machloikes in Yerushalmi is regarding Meleches Boina when it's a binyan. And it's not at all clear that binyan lesho and Ohel Arei are the same. I think binyan lesho is a binyan which in its nature cannot stand long. Ohel Arei depends what your plans are. Do you plan to take it apart or you don't take it apart? But besides the differentiation between lesho and Arei, and lesho and Arei doesn't necessarily mean the same, but the bigger difference is between binyan and Ohel. Binyan lesho might be an issa diuraisa, and that's a machloikes ameroim. And a big discussion, what is maskonas aroch and babli regarding binyan lesho? But that is in Meleches Boina binyan, has nothing to do with Ohel. But Ohel Arei is an Esderabonon. And then 2 fundamental questions. How do we define an Ohel? Is it the roof or the mechitzas? Or maybe both? one without the other would be an Isser or not. Two Seifim Meshita Zvov. Seif Aleph makes it clear, mechitzas without a top is definitely not an oil. Unless it's a mechitza materes. Mechitza materes has more cheshivas. Mechitza materes, it would be an Isser mechitzas even without a cover. But if it's not a mechitza materes, and the example is Paroiches Shel Aron Kodesh, it's a minhag, and Reb Shimon Sofer has a fascinating tshuva. I think it's Siman Aleph in Michtav Sofer, which is the Shabbos tshuvas of the younger son of the son of Sofer, Reb Shimon Sofer. And he has a fascinating tshuva. And the tshuva was written in the time of the Reformists and the Maskilim. And the first changes they try to make B'minhag Yisrael is in Beis HaKnesses, the tzura of a Beis HaKnesses. And Reb Shimon Sofer has a fascinating tshuva. And he explains that the Mesoris, the structure of a Beis HaKnesses, is based on the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore we should change nothing. And he explains, the Aron Kodesh is Keneged Kodesh HaKodeshim. What was there on Kodesh HaKodeshim? The Aron, Luchas Abyss, and a Sefer Torah. We don't have any Luchas, but we have a Sefer Torah. And that is the source of the minhag in many cases to have Luchas on top of the Aron Kodesh. It's somewhat of a zeicher. Because in Kodesh HaKodeshim there were Luchas. We don't have any Luchas. Even in Bayis Sheni they didn't have any Luchas. But they did have a Sefer Torah. So the Aron Kodesh is Keneged Kodesh HaKodeshim. Omud HaTfilah, where the Chazan stands, is Keneged Mizbeach HaZor, Mizbeach HaPnimi, Mizbeach HaKtoides. And that was in the Heichel, very close to Kodesh HaKodeshim. And that's why he insists the Chazan needs to stand up in front next to the Kodesh and not in the middle of the shul, like in the modern shuls. The Bima is designated for Kriyas HaTorah, that is Mizbeach HaChitzon, because the Gemara Megillah says, Avraham Avinu asked the Kodesh Baruch Hu, what will be with my children after Chorban Beis HaMikdash? They have no karbonos. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu said, B'yamei Moyed, they will read Parshas HaKarbonos, V'mala Ani Aleim, Kilu Krivu Korban. So the Shimon Sofer says the Bima is Keneged Mizbeach HaChitzon. That's the Mizbeach of the Karbonos, and Kriyas HaTorah is for Karbonos. And Reb Shimon Sofer says that's why our minhag is that the Aron Kodesh has a paroiches. You could have the most beautiful doors, but you should have a paroiches. And that's the paroiches that was modeled between Kodesh and Kodesh HaKodesh in Beis HaMikdash. It was a paroiches, and that is the minhag. Always to have a paroiches. Some modern shuls have beautiful decorated doors, and they no longer have a paroiches. According to Reb Shimon Sofer, that's wrong, because Kodesh HaKodeshim had a paroiches, and therefore we should have one. So mechitza meteres, and there are different examples in Shulchan Aruch and the Poskim. What is defined as a mechitza meteres? And it said that Rabbanan, even though there is no top, but if there is no top and it's just a mechitza biyalma, tznius is not defined as oil. And how about a top without walls? That's a machlokes in the Shonim. The Roshim Beitz Perek Dalet says, if it's a binyan choshuv, there will be an Isser on a kisel, even though it doesn't have walls. And that brings us to the sugya Shabbos Mem Gimel Amid Beis. Shabbos Mem Gimel Amid Beis, oisem mechitza l'chai, ein oisem mechitza l'meis. So if a mace is in a shus harabim, even though it's not koid a mace, it's a hot day and it's out in the sun, and the body might become somewhat decomposed, and it's a bisoy in a mace, that does not matter asiyas mechitza. But if the people are there shoymei hameis, oisem mechitza b'shvil chaim. And the Gemara says, what do they do? Cham lehem elamata, so we bring chairs. Cham lehem elamala, porcelain machzelas. And then b'derech haroma, each of them could get up, v'zoykef mitosai, and when he lifts his bed or his chair, whatever he was sitting on, and then the machzelas would have mechitzas, and they will cover the maze and prevent sunshine to hurt the body of the mace. So it's a haroma, and it's one of the sources in which haroma is a legitimate tool in halacha. as if they're doing it for themselves, but the real intention is, we're not going to sit here for long. We just sat down because for a chai you could make a mechitza, and then when we leave, there will be a mechitza for the mace. So the Gemara says, mito, machzeles, kol echad kam, v'zoykef mito. So in Rashi and Tosfos both explain, that needs to be the seder. Melamalo lamato, not melamato lamalo. You cannot bring walls and then spread out the top. Because that is derech binyan. And Chazal weren't matter even for a chai. But if it's melamalo lamato, and that is not derech binyan, then it's mutar. So the Achronim ask, according to the opinions that there is an Isser making it up even without mechitzas, then you solve no problem. Because melamala lamata is mutar, but they were already over an Isser when they spread out the machzeles. Because if there's an Isser begad, bali mechitzas, and that's a machlokes and a shonim, then how are they allowed to spread that machzeles? Chazonish. V'kederech Chazonish tehilel David, and this is an interesting chavrusa. Chazonish seminum Weiss. Tehilel David, semishin tesvov. Tehilel David was a sadegera chosid, and but it's one of the chosheves for Meshachanoch Chaim. He's very stark and very clear and very independent. Tehilel David goes his way, and his name was David Rothenberg. Tehilel David Shin Tezvov, Chazonish Seminum Weiss, both prove from this halacha that as long as you need to hold oil in your hands, it has no din of oil, not even in Isra Rabbanan, because it's not the nature of an oil. So spreading out a machzeles and you hold it in your hand is not an oil at all, not even an oil arei, and it wouldn't even be an Isra Rabbanan. And therefore, when does it become an oil? And then the machzeles rests on those mitois zekufos. That is the stage in which it becomes an oil, and therefore is melamalo lamato. So this is a chiddush of the Chazon Ish, and the same we find in Tehilel David. But obviously it's not lekuli alma, because it's in Tov Kuv Beis, the Bira Gro proves from this Gemara that there is no Isser in making a top without mechitzes, unless it's a binyan choshev. But this is definitely not a binyan choshev. Priestess machzeles. So the Bira Gro wants to prove from this Gemara that there is no Isser on a cover as long as there are not mechitzes. According to the Chazon Ish, we could prove nothing from this din, because the reason it's not an oil in this din is because you need to hold it. And the moment you let go, there no longer is an oil. So obviously the Gra was not mekabel this svara of the Chazon Ish, and l'shitosoi there might be an Isser oil even though you need to hold it in your hand.
Is the Chaluk on Rashi?
What?
The Goins coming to say the Lochas not Rashi?
I don't know. I think the Gaon speaks according to those opinions that there would be an Isser. If it's not Osur Litzel, then there would be no Isser. But the problem is, in this case, in Shabbos Yom Gimel, it is Osur Litzel, and if it's Osur Litzel, there definitely is an Isser. So that's why I mentioned the Rosh, Binyan Choshev. If it's not a Binyan Choshev, there would be no Isser having it up without mechitzas. So obviously, according to the Chazon Ish, we could prove nothing from this Gemara. So there's some Sofer in Simanayim Beis Shus Chaim, when he goes against the Noid Yehuda, the Noid Yehuda says, opening an umbrella would be a dioraisa, based on the Rif. Im Yesh, Begagoy Tefach, it's a oil kava. So I mentioned before, Im Yesh Begagoy Tefach, it could be an oil kava, but that is not the only factor. So it's a pair on the Noid Yehuda. The Sam Sofer brings the Yerushalmi Binyan L'Sho. And this is also something, for me, difficult to accept. Has nothing to do with the Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi deals with Binyan. we're dealing with oil. So our question wouldn't depend at all on any opinion in the Yerushalmi, because oil ali definitely is only in the Rabbanim. But the Chassam Sofer has three reasons in which he writes. It can't be a diorais, and maybe not even in the Rabbanim. Chassam Sofer writes, an oil that you carry around is not an oil. The Chassam Sofer is not the same as the Chazon Ish. Some people confuse the two. In the case of the Chazon Ish, you're not carrying around that oil. It's stationary. It's in one place. But the chesoron of defining it as an oil, because you need to hold it. And the moment you let go, there no longer is an oil. Regarding an umbrella, the argument of the Chassam Sofer is, an oil that moves around together with the person is not an oil. And that's a different svara. Because an umbrella in one hand is an oil even if you don't need to hold it up. You could put it down, you could pick it up, and the structure of the oil stays. So on one hand, an umbrella is more mukim lahachnia than the machzeres. But according to the Chassam Sofer, the umbrellas, there's a svara lahokal yoisem machzeres, because the machzeres is in one place, and being in one place is more like an oil. The argument of the Chassam Sofer is there is no oil that moves around from one place to the other. That is not the nature of an oil. So the Chazon Ish and the Torah say one thing. The Chassam Sofer says another thing. It's not the same svara.
Anything to do with oil zark? Is there any shaykhs that say oil zark?
It should have a shaykhs, but it doesn't. Because oil zark is a question regarding Tumah v'Tahara. Not necessarily has anything to do with asiyas oil. In Hilchos Shabbos we're dealing with the issue of asiyas oil. In Tumah v'Tahara we're dealing, would it have a din of a binyan to be choitzis mipnei tumah? So it's a very good example. Sometimes different sugyas, we spoke about this a few times regarding the concept of a kli. When we learned Hilchos Netilas Yadayim and Hilchos Muktzah, how does one define a kli? So there are 4 areas in halacha in which defining a kli is important. Tumas Kalim. It's dioraisa. Netilas Yadayim. She'uvin to pasal a mikveh. We learn mikvois. We learn Hilchos Netilas Yadayim. And the 4th area is Muktzah b'Shabbos, and in each of these areas, the kli would have a different definition. Oh, number 5, Tfilas Kalim. Is Tfilas Kalim the same as Tumas Kalim? That's a big discussion. So 5 different areas to define a kli. How do we define an oil? Tumah v'Tahara might be one thing, oil zorek, Shabbos might be a different thing. So how do we deal with Hanes Siyane, which is a sugi in Erevin and in Shabbos Kuf Lamed Ches, and it's a pellet that the Chassam Sofer doesn't mention it. The Chassam Sofer says an oil that's carried around is not an oil. How about a hat? So there's a machlokes Rashi and Rambam. What would be the issur of Hanes Siyane? Rashi says your hat might get blown off your head by the wind. And Toysers are 2 different pshatim. Many Rishonim, including the Rambam, say it's a question of oil, and therefore, if it's a hard-brimmed hat, so the Litvische hats of 6 months ago would be a problem of oil. Recently, Litvische hats no longer have a tefach, a brim. That's what I realized, looking at people. So there no longer will be a problem of oil. But many Rishonim, including the Rambam, say that it's a problem if it's hard and it's a tefach, then there's oil, and the Chassam Sofer doesn't deal with this. Would there be a difference between an oil you carry around in your hat and one that's sitting on your head? Maybe yes, because people's hands, usually people like their hands to be free. Whatever you do with your hands. So an oil that you need to carry in your hand is less of an oil than one you put on your head. people needs their hands more than they need their heads. Let's put it that way. Your hands need to be free. Your head doesn't need to be free. So there might be a difference between oil, which is a hat, which even according to the Chassam Sofer might be more of an oil than an umbrella. But it's still a pellet that the Chassam Sofer doesn't mention because it's a sugya twice in Shas, and it's Tosfos, and he ignores the sugya. But I still am trying to be massive the Chassam Sofer. Maybe your hat, which it doesn't, you still have free hands, would be more of an oil than an oil that you carry around in a umbrella. But the Chassam Sofer's argument is a different one. And the Chassam Sofer's argument is a simple one. An oil that will flop and be undone the moment you don't carry it is not an oil. It is too much of an arai even to be an Issa D'Rabbanan, because it's not an oil. The moment you take your hands down, there is no longer an oil. So the Chazon Ish's argument is a different one, and according to him, it's not an oil because it is too much of an arai even to be considered an oil. So I mentioned the big controversy, the machlokes between Shnei Gedolei Hayonim, who were the greatest poskim of their time, the Nidibud and Chassam Sofer, regarding the parasol. And the Chazon Ish, it's the same Chazon Ish that I mentioned before, and the Chazon Ish, as always, says Divrei Tam, and usually it's Kilur Elaynaim. The Chazon Ish really wonders, and he says, to me it's a pshitas that it can be an Issa D'Oraisa because it's the sugya of oil, and it is by nature an oil arai. And this troubled me a lot. So, a contemporary of the Noida B'Yehuda was Reb David Pardo, a Sephardic Gadol. I think it was in Mitzrayim, and he's best known for Chasdei David and Tosefta, one of the Choshavim and Foshim Tosefta, and Shalshu is Michtam LeDavid. And a Michtam LeDavid, Simen Aleph, there's a very long tshuva about the parasol. And the same question came up in Prague at the Noida B'Yehuda and in the Sephardic communities. Obviously, it was modern technology. Today, we wouldn't even call it an umbrella technology. Today, technology is amazing, you know, miracles. GPS, the internet. But at the time, an umbrella was a technological feat. And the Michtam LeDavid also was machmir. But what I learned from the Michtam LeDavid and the Pri Megadim in Shin Tezvav and the Bialoch in Shin Tezvav, the parasol of yore was not like an umbrella today. Modern umbrellas, you press a button, it opens. I have an umbrella, press the button and it closes. That's a bigger chiddush. But the parasol of yore, you need to open it up and then tie it down. And it is obvious it was more of a chashash boina, because you need to be mechaber different pieces, and it was a process. I mentioned this when we spoke about the mechitzas, you know, these acoustic walls that you would just move from one place to the other. So I understood better. There's a sefer, Give Us Pinchas, which is not a very well-known sefer, but it's a choshev sefer because it shows the tshuvas from the haflo, from the Baal haflo. So in Kodelim, we learn halacha, but in yeshivas, I don't think in today's olam yeshivas. My guess would be that a bocher could learn ksuvas in the yeshiva for a year, and he never opened that flow. Which, when we were bocher, that would be insane. You can't learn one block in ksuvas without that flow. But today, all the bocher use are, you know, likutim and these modern forum. So that flow was one of the greatest gedolim of his era, and we have the Maklan Kiddushin, the Aflon Ksubis, and just to get an idea, the greatness of the flow, the Noida B'Yehuda writes in his introduction to the Tzlach, I had a plan to write a Sefer on Ksubis, but then I saw a new Sefer came out, the flow, and I have nothing to add on what he didn't speak about. That's what the Noida B'Yehuda writes, and it's an amazing Eidish. So, Shalosh Tshuvas gives Pinchas a Tshuvas from the Haflo. Not many Tshuvas, but Simon Zion, he also writes about the parasol, about the umbrella. Obviously, it was a question that many Gedolim dealt with at the time, and he has also Machmir, but he doesn't argue that it's a Dioraisa like the Noida B'Yehuda. He just says it's an Oyalarai, and he says if somebody opens it on Erev Shabbos, you could carry it around on Shabbos, but you can't open it on Shabbos because Ein Begagoi Tefach. So I think at the time I told you this story. A few years ago, a person came to me, asked for a skuma for a Shabbos umbrella. I tell you about this. So I said, what's a Shabbos umbrella? So he brought an umbrella. First of all, it's white, not black. Kovet Shabbos. And with big, bold letters, Kovet Shabbos Kodesh. And he asked, could you use this on Shabbos? So everybody could imagine the fact that it's white. And it's an amazing Kovet Shabbos, because it's written Kovet Shabbos Kodesh. That would not be enough for me to give a heter. But the big chiddush was, all the other umbrellas are pointed at the top, and this one had a dome, which was wide at tefach. That's an amazing idea. So im yesh begagi tefach, it's moisef ol oyalarai, mutar lo yisef ol oyalarai. Ein oisen oyalarai, but mutar lo yisef ol oyalarai. If it has a tefach, it is defined as an oil. So even when you close the umbrella, it has a top, like a dome-shaped top, which is slightly broader than a tefach. That would be a Shabbos umbrella. I told him, I love it, it's a great idea. So my eskuma is eskuma number 2. And he asked me, what do you mean? I said that Moshe Sternbuch would be number 1, and then come back to me for eskuma number 2. I haven't seen him since. So obviously, he's still working on eskuma number 1. And I promised him, when you have number 1, come back, and I'll be number 2.
What's going to happen when you put the umbrella down? It's going to have to come with a stand. Do you always leave it up?
Yeah, so I assume that, yeah. So,
The Rav said,
because I just promised to be a skumber number 2, I didn't really get into it. I assumed that part of the kit will need to be some ma'amad in which you stick in the umbrella and it still has that tefach dome on top.
the Rav said that the Chaznish and the some Sofer would disagree, because the difference is when I drop a regular umbrella, the shape will stay. So why is this umbrella with the bigger dome still alright? That part is permanent. That's never going away, and no matter what shape it is, it's never going away.
It is, because I think you need a roichev tefach.
No, but right.
To have under the tefach, that's the concept of an oil. So if you lay it down, that would no longer be an oil aray.
As long as the point from the bottom of it to the top would not be a tefach.
Yeah. So that's why I say, if I will ever give a skuma number 2, then part of it would be that even when you put down the umbrella, you need to put it into some ma'amad that the tefach will always stay on top. And only then would it be defined as moisef al oyal aray. So we briefly discussed the yesodus of oyal. Gag b'li mechitzas b'li gag. And how do we define an oyal aray? And 3 different questions regarding, would there be an oil that would be less than an oyal aray? So the Chazon Ish and the Teilah David, 1 point, there's some sofer number 2, and Hanasiyana would be number 3. And maybe there would be a difference between a hat, an umbrella, and the Chazon Ish's argument that just holding a machzeres would not be defined as an oil, and the Bir Agro would not accept that svara, because the Bir Agro wants to prove from this sugya when would a cover without mechitzas be defined a mechitza and when not. So obviously, according to the Chazon Ish, this sugya won't prove anything about a cover without mechitzas.
An open umbrella that's already opened totally and put on a stand outside. So you just take it and walk along with it. But obviously, there would not be any shadow at all. So I just want to think that today it's open to Chol. Because it's bigger milsa and already became. So there's no way to matter an umbrella.
Right. So the Chazon Ish, in that very same paragraph, which he speaks about an umbrella, and this is very important, the Chazon Ish on one hand writes, I don't see any Isser of oil. But he does write about Zerusa the Shabbos, and he writes that might be more Chumer than a Shabbos. It's a very stark allusion there. Do we have a Chazon Ish here? We just want to reiterate. Chazon Ish on Chaim? Here we are. So he writes a lesson, which I really want to go over again. I think this is some in Nun Beis. I did not make a note of the Weiss, just the Siman. Okay, here we are. Ois Vav. Divrei Anoida BiYehuda, בפסיכס הפורסול בשבס, אינו מסיישבים. זה ממש דין כיסא טרסקל, אין מקום לחלק כאן בין נעשה אלוהי ללא נעשה אלוהי, בין נויסה גם החיצס אלוהי, שהרי זה חושב כתש משדלס. וזה טעם ההתר. So he compares it to opening a door and closing a door, which is a chiddush, which one could argue against.
Is that the regular heter of all the cars?
Just a moment. מה שיש לא דנו משום תיקן מונה, כיוון דפסיכוס אירוע לשמש בוי בכל מקום חושב תיקן מונה, תפי מפליס הסויל במקום זה. וגם אף שמילס תפי, וניקה בוי עובדה דחויל, וגוירם פרצה, והרי אסלו קילם מפני שאינם בני תוירה. הרי הדובה מוסר החכומם לגדור גדר במקום הפרצה, וזה יויס החומר מאיסר פרוטי ליוחד, כי זה גדר לעם כולו ולדורס. Very typical of the Chazon Ish. Yosef Chomer Me'isur Liyochid. And fundamentally, he comes back to Uvda Chomer. And Uvda Chomer is a Hagdara which is impossible clearly to define. So there were two technological breakthroughs which caused machlokes between Gedolei Zman in the last 150 years. One was the umbrella and the other was the bicycle. Is it legitimate to ride a bicycle on Shabbos? And once again, some Gedolim said Uvnei D'Choyel, and others, like the Marshag, say, I don't see any Issa riding a bicycle. Shemi Yachtach Zamoira, Masha Gazel Gazel, Masha Loi Gazel Loi Gazel. So what I wrote in one of my chubas, I think, transportation by its very nature is Uvnei D'Choyel. Shvu Ish Dach. The Navi says. Al Yitzesh Makoy my Posek and Torah. Shabbos is a Yom Menucha. Mechze Kamanda Ozer Lachinga. We find in the Gemara as an Issa. It looks as if he's going to the marketplace. So transportation is Uvdachar. There's a tshuva in Shor Meisha, and many tshuvas in that kufa were written about trains. So this week I discussed the Masham. Did one need to light Ner Chanukah in a train? Because the first land means of transportation were trains, far before planes and even before cars. We've been using trains for more than 200 years. So, what I discussed was Ner Hanukkah, but how do I get to a train?
Modes of transportation.
Uvdin Dechol. So the Noidi Buddha deals with the question, some cities have trolleys which don't cost money. You just get on and you get off. Would that be Mutter and Shabbos? You don't need to pay. You don't need to have a ticket. You just get on the train, get off the train, and Shalom Eshav is Mekel. Others argue that's Uvdin Dechol. Because usually either you need a ticket or you need to pay, it's Uvdin Dechol. And I say transportation is Uvdin Dechol. And therefore, these little tricycles for kids, that's not transportation, that's recreation, that's fun, it's like a toy. And you usually use it in your background or in your home, and that would not be an Isra at all. But a real bicycle is a means of transportation. You know, some cities in the world, like Amsterdam or many other cities in Europe, tens of thousands of people drive to work on a bicycle.
What's just something like a skateboard, that it's for fun, but people also do it?
Okay, so I skateboard, hoverboard, rollers. There are so many new things every different day. So a skateboard, I definitely think is less of a means of transportation than a hoverboard or a
Segway.
scooter or a Segway. So many different things today. But fundamentally, what I argue is any means of transportation is over the Chol. Because Shabbos, you're not supposed to go anywhere. Shabbos, you should be at home. So it depends, is it recreation, is it just for fun, or is it really a means of transportation?
Somet has a power scooter, right? Like a chair for someone who's disabled. So I think the Rav might anyway have problems with the way that they mount the electricity. I'm not exactly sure. It might be Moshe, it might be something else. But just on the Uvdin Dechol sign, is that called that's called transportation, or that's called a sophisticated wheelchair?
It's a good question. It's hard for me to go into many details, but I think if it would only be Uvdin Dechol, there definitely would be a room for leniency for a Chodesh She'en B'Sakana. L'cha'or Uvdin Dechol is Yoisa Kal Mamir L'Nochi. I'm not sure. I would very much be thankful if you could find some sources. Amir Enoch is mutar l'chodesh She'en B'Sakana. Would Uvdin Dechol be mutar? I don't know. I don't remember.
Are there klalim? Because in Shimch of Zion, there's a heter for Uvdin Dechol if the kli is miyochad l'Shabbos.
Because then it wouldn't be defined as Uvdin Dechol.
That's why
So I'm saying that applies to every
Shabbos
case.
is
No,
right.
but that's the Gemara called Uvdin Dechol. That's Uvdin Dechol Mikina the Gemara, and that has a heter if it's miyochad l'Shabbos.
I don't know. But I think if it's miyuchat for Shabbos, it wouldn't be defined as a medachal. So we're dealing with a comb that's miyuchat in Shabbos, but I don't know. It's an interesting question. L'cha'oira, Uvdin Dechol should be yoisa kal mamir l'anochi. Because I don't think Uvdin Dechol is defined as a shvus, and amir l'anochi is a shvus. So the Gemara in Eivan says shvus she'en b'maisa, but it's still a shvus. But it would be very interesting to find sources. So when we're dealing with disabled people, if it would be mitzad Uvdin Dechol, we would be more makel. But if it's a chashash mitzad the gum and electricity, that makes it more problematic.
Chazanish is Uvdin Dechol is opening the umbrella. The question is, well, still, if there was an already opened umbrella before Shabbos.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Shamati Pamo that.
I don't know. To me, it seems that using an umbrella. What did you hear?
Yeshua that he was worried people were going to be Samach on Erev. That was the whole. Pastors didn't want people to be Samach on Erev.
Maybe. How
So
would I?
Tanya, could you make over the Chol?
What?
That's to cover a stroller or something. So you need an umbrella for a cotton to cover a baby or something. You don't have a rain cover or whatever it is.
If the only problem is with the Chol,
Yeah.
then cotton is a Chol.
Maybe.
This is the falls like more Siguri, so maybe it's more calmer.
That's right.
It is very common in Chazanish when he throws, various different arguments, one on top of the other. He writes with the Nechoyel and Perza, and it's a Perza Ram, Ledoiris, so. But this is typical of the Chazanish.